Now, today is a significant day. Does anyone know what is significant about today? I think I've heard it. Star Wars Day. May the Force be with you, yes. But the Force is with us. I'm wearing my characteristic Star Wars socks this morning, just in low-key celebration there. But for those of you that aren't familiar with Star Wars, May the 4th is the day that's technically called Star Wars Day. It goes by the famous phrase in the Star Wars franchise that a lot of people say, May the Force be with you. And of course, in that context, it's a mythical force that kind of exists and is how people become powerful like Jedi. And of course, today we're talking about freedom from guilt. Freedom is another force that's at work in us and in our world. And we experience it in a lot of different ways. For instance, who's got something that they are really passionate about is the right thing to do? It could be something like the correct spelling for there or your. Does anyone know? Is anyone passionate about spelling that correctly or using the right your or the right there in a sentence? Do you really feel like correcting people when they use it wrong? I mean, you just need to look through social media for a second or two and you get what I'm talking about. For those of you who have an innate need to correct, social media is not the place for you to do that. It's not loving. I mean, it's loving in a way, but is that really how it's communicated to others? Anyway, we probably all have things like that we hold as a standard for ourselves that other people don't necessarily hold to. The thing is about those things, for me it's probably more driving related, driving slowly. In fact, I was driving a month ago and going through a roundabout and someone stopped in the middle of the roundabout to let me through the roundabout. And I was like, that's not how the road rules work. So I refused to enter. I just waited for them to get the message after about a minute or something, a standoff. But we all have standards that we try and hold others to and hold ourselves to. But the thing about those standards is we are really good at letting ourselves off, aren't we? We might make a spelling error and we're like, oh, that's right. I just need to send the message quickly. It's okay. Oh, we're in a rush. It doesn't matter if I cut someone off. I need to get over 3 lanes and I'm just going to go. I need to do it. And we're really good at excusing ourselves for things we know we hold others to a better standard, perhaps than even what we are capable of doing. Guilt is the idea that our actions have failed to meet a standard, have failed to meet either our standard, someone else's standard, what we know is right. And of course, we can be guilty without even knowing it too, until the speeding fine comes through in the mail, and then you realise, oh yeah, I was speeding. And I can tell you that I'm not friends with that section of Leach Highway just outside of the church here. I've been caught too many times, and I'm guilty of coming out of the traffic lights and speeding up until I look at my speedo and realise, oh, I've gone too fast, flash, I'm guilty. But we can be guilty in many ways, and we can experience it in many ways. Although it's interesting, I find in our culture today, I don't think our young people have really much concept of guilt. If you talk to anyone in Gen Z, Gen Alpha, guilt is not something necessarily they experience. They're pragmatic. Does this work? Does this not work? Is this going to bring me honor in my community? Or are people going to not like this? Are they going to cancel me? And so we see our younger generations moving in ways of shame and guilt more so than moving in ways of shame and fame than in experiencing guilt. But we do experience it still in many ways. We might feel institutional guilt, like what I've described. When we break a law, we get the speeding fine, we're deemed guilty. You might experience relational guilt when you hurt someone else and you feel guilty that you've said something or done something or let someone down. You might experience projected guilt, where someone else has tried to make you feel guilty over something perhaps that you didn't do or have no control over. We might experience false guilt over something that really isn't our fault or we shouldn't see as our fault. And we might feel guilty over someone else's actions, that we could have done something. We might experience guilt because we've made a mistake. We've done the wrong thing, and we know what the right thing is to do. We feel guilty. And so we experience guilt in many different ways. And our Bible passage here explores guilt. We have the Pharisees. They're projecting guilt onto the disciples and saying, hey, you've broken the law, you're guilty. Then we have the disciples, we have Jesus. And this passage unpacks guilt and what Jesus does with guilt in this passage. So we're going to unpack this a little bit today. So this passage points towards the guilt of the disciples, but also the guilt of the Pharisees, and how Jesus is the one that can take away their guilt. And we'll see our guilt as well. To start with, to open the scene, the Matthew says that the disciples and Jesus are walking through a field on the Sabbath. So they're trudging through the field, and the disciples are hungry. You know, they follow Jesus everywhere. They've gone with him through many places, ministering by the lakes, and now walking through fields, going up the road. They're hungry. They haven't had a chance to stop and eat. This is not the only place in Scripture where we see that Jesus and the disciples are hungry. And I imagine there's a conversation going on. Have we got time to just stop? I just want to grab a little a snack pack to eat along the way. And so they do. They stop, they grab some grain, and they go and eat it. In a community that size, probably much similar to in the video that we just saw from Gunther and Sarah. There's people always watching. There's people always watching. It's not like going down to the shops here, and you're lucky if you see someone you know. Back there, everyone knew everything, everyone was watching. Whether the Pharisees saw it straight up with their own eyes or whether they were told it, they know it. They know something has happened here. The question is, were they doing something wrong? Well, they're picking some grain. Now, Deuteronomy chapter 23 has something interesting to say about this. There's some rules and laws that God has given to his people. And he says, well, if you enter a neighbor's vineyard, you may eat all the grapes you want, but do not pick up any in your basket. If you enter a neighbor's grain field, you may pick up kernels with your hands, but you must not put a sickle to their standing grain. It's a bit like on bin day in our street. You know, if you see all your neighbours have put the bins out and you've got too many bags of rubbish, you open the bin next to you and see, oh, has that got space for mine? Yes, okay, I can pop it in as long as you don't fill it, you see. As long as you leave some space in there in case your neighbour's got something else to throw in late at night. It's a little bit like that. You know, it's a common courtesy kind of thing. You know, if you're hungry, you walk over past your neighbour, he's got some grapes, he's got some grain in the field, you may take a little bit on your way. There's no harm in doing that. So it's quite reasonable, isn't it? It's quite reasonable, God's provision here for his people. There's a community at work here providing for each other. However, and this is where the Pharisees kind of take issue with what the disciples were doing. While there is a specific provision for God's people to be able to do exactly what the disciples are doing, they pick up on when they did it, which is on the Sabbath. That was our context. Remember, the disciples are walking through the field on the Sabbath. Now, the Sabbath is a big animal in and of itself that the Pharisees were careful not to touch. Now, this goes right back to Exodus, as the people were freed, people of God were freed from Egypt by God. God leads them through the desert, and he provides for them in the desert. And in the desert, he gives them food to eat. They were hungry in the desert. There wasn't much. And God says, I will provide you food every day so you can trust me. You're not to collect more than a day's worth of food. The manna and quail provide will only last for that day. What do the people do? They go and try and collect more, don't they? They were stockpiled up. But it turns rotten the next day, not edible. And then God says, I'm going to give you enough for 6 days. And on the 6th day, you can collect double. And it will last you, and it won't go rotten the day after. So you can remember on the Sabbath that I am the one who provides. And I am providing for you so that you might rest and recognize that I am God. And so in Exodus 34, verse 21, God says this. He says, you have 6 days each week for your ordinary work. But on the 7th day, you must stop working, even during the seasons of ploughing and harvest. as I was reading this, I was thinking, which dad has heard their son say, I'm a pro at gaming? And they stop and say, hang on a sec, does that mean you're getting paid for this? I want a cut. You know, we see something that's just not quite right and we want to step in. The Pharisees have saw something that's not quite right. They've seen that the disciples are harvesting. They're working, they're harvesting grain on the Sabbath. They're like, hold on. You have broken the Sabbath. You are working on the Sabbath. It's not necessarily what they were doing, it's when they were doing it. And of course, the big thing, who they were doing it with. They're implying Jesus is guilty by association too. I think the Pharisees are looking for something, a reason to make Jesus guilty. And we see at the end of the passage, they start to plot into how they can get rid of Jesus, how they can kill him. It's interesting how Jesus responds to this implication that him and the disciples are guilty. Now, he points to King David. King David, the most revered king of all Israel. Everyone looks up to and respects him. He's not a perfect man by any sense of the imagination. But wow, people respected him. And we'll see that Jesus says, well, hang on a second. David was in the temple of God, the house of God. Sorry, the temple wasn't built then. He was in the tabernacle of God, the tent. And he eats some of the bread that's only meant to be for the priests. That was a whole other law. This bread was only to be eaten by the priests. So it says he went into the house of God where his companions broke the law. Him and his companions broke the law. Did he enter the most holy of holy place? It doesn't say. But the priests were okay with it. They gave him the bread. And so they were okay with what David did back then because he was hungry. So if you compare what David did to what the disciples did, surely David's far more guilty. He's not just eating some grain out of a field. No, he's actually taking the bread out of the very house of God. And the priests were okay with it back then. So it's starting to get a little bit silly what the Pharisees are talking about, isn't it? I mean, in our Australian culture, we'll be like, well, the grain really, it didn't matter what the disciples were doing. It didn't matter. We might be tempted, though, to think that Jesus is minimizing, that he's using this far more extreme example to say that this example's okay. And we do that all the time in our life, don't we? Oh, I haven't killed anyone, I'm okay. And we minimize. We minimize. Is that what Jesus is doing here? Well, let's go on. Jesus then explains. He says, or haven't you read the law that the priests on the Sabbath duty in the temple desecrate the Sabbath and yet are innocent? Whoa, here's a whole other thing going on. So we've got the disciples with their grain. We've got David eating bread that's meant to be only for the priests. But now we've got the priests and Jesus is saying, you guys, the Pharisees, you're desecrating the Sabbath with the work you do on the Sabbath and offering sacrifices and killing animals and offering them. You're desecrating the Sabbath. Wow, this probably backfired a bit on the Pharisees, I think. But it's interesting there that Jesus says, yet you guys are innocent. Why are the Pharisees innocent of what they're doing? Well, let's get technical here for a little bit, because the Pharisees are getting technical and so is Jesus. See, the Pharisees are guilty, but there's something that acquits them, and that's the work in the temple of God. The temple is made for God's worship. The Sabbath is made for man and for man's rest and worship and reminder of who God is. And so in that logic, the temple actually outranks the Sabbath. And so the priests, they're able to serve in the temple because they're doing it for God. And that's why Jesus is saying, but you guys are free to do that. You're innocent, even though you have broken the law of the Sabbath, the same thing you're accusing the disciples and I of. Because now look who appears guilty. The Pharisees, the disciples, even King David. Everyone is guilty. Jesus doesn't minimize the sin. He doesn't minimize the breaking of God's law. You might be thinking, but that's ridiculous. Surely Jesus needs to call them out and say, compared to what you guys have done, we're fine. We haven't done anything wrong. My disciples have not done anything wrong. Well, Jesus makes a couple of conclusions here. Everyone is guilty. The question is, who is giving mercy? The temple gives mercy and compassion and innocence to the priests. But Jesus makes a comment and says, I tell you there is something greater than the temple here. And he's meaning right here with his disciples and with the Pharisees that are accusing him. He's saying there's something even greater that has even more authority to give mercy and compassion than what the priests and the temple have. And that's Jesus. And the reason it's Jesus is because it's God with us. And that outranks the temple, the worship of God, the very presence of God with us. Now, if the Pharisees had known that, then they wouldn't have questioned, because they would have seen that Jesus has given mercy. They would have seen that Jesus saw how hungry his disciples were and had given them mercy. So Jesus comes to say, there is something greater that you've missed about the Sabbath and actually about me. Because Jesus is saying, I am greater. I have the power to declare innocent who you say is guilty. So as we dig into this passage and think about Jesus' statements in answering the religious leaders, what does that have to say today for us about guilt, about how do we deal with guilt? I think on one level, we know that rules and laws are good. They give us stability. They give us predictability in relationships, when we're driving through roundabouts. It's helpful, isn't it? The law is helpful. But on a deeper level, we also know that the law actually brings with it a standard that needs to be met. Now, while our road rules are much more relaxed than the law in the Bible, we still break them from time to time. And Jesus here, when he talks to the Pharisees and the disciples, he doesn't do away with the law. He doesn't minimize it like we are tempted to do in our own lives, that this doesn't matter. This little sin doesn't matter. I can live with that. No, he says earlier in Matthew chapter 5, he says, do not think that I have come to abolish the law of the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. For I truly tell you, until heaven and earth disappear, not the smallest letter, not the least stroke of a pen, will by any means disappear from the law until everything is accomplished. Continuing, Jesus says, therefore anyone who sets aside one of the least of these commands and teaches others accordingly will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever practices and teaches these commands will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you that unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, you will certainly not enter the kingdom of heaven. Jesus doesn't come to minimize the law. He comes to fulfill it. Interestingly, he says there that unless your righteousness is greater than the Pharisees, and man, their righteousness was pretty good, wouldn't they? They wouldn't take grain walking through the field on a Sabbath. They would go hungry. They would sacrifice themselves. Unless your righteousness is even greater than that, you might not even enter the kingdom of heaven. And so according to Jesus, the law has a standard which is so high that none of us are good enough. None of us could fulfill that except Jesus. He has come to fulfill the law. Something that none of us could do. He doesn't move the goalposts. No, he kicks straight through the middle. Something we could not do. He doesn't excuse our guilt. He doesn't excuse the disciples' guilt. No, he has the authority to offer mercy. Mercy to his disciples where he has compassion for them. and their hunger. Just like in the original Sabbath, where God provides manna and he provides enough for 2 days so that they will recognize and have space to worship God. So Jesus too sees the humanity and he offers mercy to his disciples who were with him. And of course, as they move on and go into the synagogue, there's a man who's crippled, who's discarded by society, who's not even welcome in the synagogue, who shouldn't even be there. Jesus has compassion on him too. And in front of everyone, he declares him innocent before God, that which other people had rejected, that which other people declared guilty. Remember, guilt is, not living up to the standard. Whether we know what the standard is or not, whether we realize we're guilty or have to wait until the speeding fine comes through, we're all guilty before a law that requires even greater righteousness than the Pharisees. But so often, instead of running to the one who can give mercy, we go in lots of other places. We do lots of other things, then come to Jesus with our guilt. We might try and cover up our guilt. We might hide it because we're ashamed. We put on a nice face, and deep down we've got a secret that we've covered up, that we're guilty about. We might overcompensate. We might be extra generous to someone. We might not be able to say no to people because we're guilty and we feel guilt. It drives us in unhealthy ways. We might avoid things that might trigger our guilt and feelings of guilt. We might avoid people we've hurt. We might avoid things that trigger. We might run from it. We might stop reading the Bible or stop praying. We might stop coming to church because we feel guilty. We might also try and project it onto others. In our own guilt, we might hold others up to a standard that they can't achieve and make ourselves feel better about it. We might even change what is right and wrong and redefine and excuse the things we're doing when we don't have the authority to do that. The dictionary has the authority on how you spell there and your. It's not something we have the authority to excuse, does it? But we might try and do it in our life. We have a lot of attempted solutions that we run to in our humanity instead of running to the one who can give us true mercy and compassion. And that is Jesus. He offers true freedom from guilt because he has come to fulfill the law. He's come to do what we couldn't do. And today, every one of us has an opportunity of being connected with our Creator, not because of how good we are, but because of the work of Jesus. He came to fulfill the law, which meant that which should have been us and what we are guilty for, our punishment. Jesus willingly took that on the cross for us, bringing freedom from that which we are guilty for, our sin. So when we come before God, we come surrendered to Jesus. Our hunger, our brokenness, our attempted solutions to deal with our guilt, our effort to be good enough, to be enough for others and ourselves, when we finally come before God with nothing left to give, that is when we find true mercy. That is when Jesus can extend us his mercy and say, you know what? I've paid the price already for all that. No more running required. That's why Paul, in his letter to the church in Rome, says, there is now no condemnation for those who belong to Christ, because he has shown mercy. He has fulfilled the requirements of what we could never meet, which is living a perfect life before our perfect Creator. So we too can experience the same compassion that Jesus gave his disciples when he saw they were hungry. Because Jesus has paid the price for them, he paid the price for us. Forgiveness for our guilt. The question is, are you hungry? Are you running? Is it time to come home and find freedom from the guilt that cripples us, that causes us to do all sorts of unhealthy things? Do you need to find freedom from guilt today? That can only be found in the one who has authority to forgive, to show mercy and compassion. So as the band comes up, we're going to take a moment this morning just to spend a few moments between you and Jesus. It's in those moments where we recognize that perhaps there's something today, something this week, something this month that we've done that we're actually guilty about when we come before our Heavenly Father.